Picture this. You're sitting in your desk, anxiously waiting for class to begin. Your professor walks in and instructs everyone to clear his or her desk of everything except for a number 2 pencil. You hear those 2 words ringing in your ears. Pop quiz. Your professor has been instructed to measure everyone's level of understanding on a specific lesson to see where they rank against other classes in the state. Some of your classmates perk up with excitement, while others slump down into their seats. Standardized tests have come under recent debate in the last few years as to whether or not they are an accurate measure of student success. But let us pause for a minute to be sure that we are all on the same page. What exactly is a standardized test? The Glossary of Education Reform defines standardized tests as any form of test that requires all test takers to answer the same questions, or a selection of questions from a common bank of questions in the same way that is scored in a standard or consistent manner, which makes it possible to compare relative performance of individual students or of groups of students. As students, we have all taken some form of standardized tests throughout the course of our education. While some of us excel on them, some of us find them to be an inaccurate measure of personal success. For this speech, I have compiled arguments from both sides of the issue and will better inform you on the pros and cons of both sides of the argument. Both sides of the debate have valid points. Those in favor of standardized tests focus on their success in other countries that are leaders in education, speak of their reliability in showing no bias, and argue the positives of the teaching-to-test method. Opponents of standardized tests in turn argue that they have not improved student achievement, speak of their unreliability, and believe that the teaching-to-test method stifles teacher creativity. Let us first examine this great debate by further examining what many people believe to be the benefits of standardized testing. Proponents of standardized testing argue their documented success in other countries, believe them to be reliable and objective, and fully believe that the teaching-to-test method can be beneficial on both educators and on students. China leads the world in many parts of education while having a long-standing tradition of implementing standardized testing procedures. China is ranked number 1 in the areas of math, science, and reading on the Program of International Student Assessment. Despite calls to lessen the pressure of these tests, China has remained firm on their stance. The chairman of the Hoover Institution's Koret Task Force on K-12 Education, Chester E. Flynn Jr., predicts that Chinese cities will top these charts for the next several decades. Proponents find these tests reliable and view them as an objective measure of student achievement. They believe that the tests level the playing field for all students. Since standardized tests are often scored by a machine, the scores are not subject to human bias. All students are taught the same lesson throughout and are given the exact same examination. A 2006 Public Agenda survey of over 1,000 public school students in grades 6 through 12 found that 71% of students think that the number of tests that they have to take is about right, while 79% believe that the test questions are fair. It is also argued that it is easier to test and compare students school by school and state by state when they are all given a standardized test. Proponents of standardized testing argue that teaching to test has many benefits. Teaching to test allows an educator to focus on essential content and skills while eliminating time-wasting activities that do not produce learning gains for students. Teaching to test motivates students to achieve. The U.S. Department of Education stated in November of 2004 that if teachers cover subject matter as required by the standards and teach it well, that students will master the material on the test, and probably much more. Proponents of standardized testing speak of their reliability in showing no bias, argue the positives of the teaching-to-test method, and focus on countries that are leaders in education. Now that we have heard the stances of those in favor of standardized tests, we will now shift our focus to the platform of those who oppose standardized tests and examine their rationale for their position. Opponents of standardized tests believe that they have not improved student achievement, find them unreliable, and argue that teaching to test harms both students and educators. Standardized tests have been heavily enforced since the passage of the No Child Left Behind Act in 2002. Since this time, the United States has fallen from 18th place to 31st place in world rankings in math on the Program for International Student Assessment. The area of science also saw a similar decline, and no change was seen in reading. A May 26, 2011 National Research Council report found no evidence that test-based incentive programs are working. They have been quoted saying, "Despite using them for several decades, Policymakers and educators do not yet know how to use test-based incentives to consistently generate positive effects on achievement and to improve education. Opponents argue that these tests are an unreliable measure of student performance. Standardized test results fluctuate too much to have any concrete form of reliable data available. In 2001, Brookings Institution found that 50 to 80% of year-over-year test score improvements were only temporary and suggested that they were caused by fluctuations that had nothing to do with long-term changes in learning. Older students have been found to not take these tests seriously as they often do not affect their grades, and they can be seen as discriminatory against non-English speaking students as well as students with learning disabilities. Opponents also argue that teaching to test is taking away from teacher creativity and trying to replace it with drill and kill learning. Standardized tests dictate what is taught, as educators are often judged based on the outcome of student performance. Educators are more apt at overteaching certain lessons in which they know a student will be tested on, which puts secondary lessons, although equally important, on the back burner. Standardized tests restrict what is taught. Teacher creativity is stifled when they are under pressure to have their students do well on these tests. A 5-year University of Maryland study from 2007 found the pressure teachers were feeling to teach the test since No Child Left Behind led to declines in teaching higher order thinking, in the amount of time spent on complex assignment, and in the actual amount of high cognitive content in the curriculum. Opponents of standardized testing criticize the teaching to test method, arguing that they stifle teacher creativity, speak of their unreliability, and argue that they have not improved student achievement. Now that we have heard from both sides of the argument, it is time that we examine what we have learned in order to come to an educated stance. Those in favor of standardized testing speak of their objectiveness, praise the teach to test method, and focus on countries that are leaders in education. Those that oppose standardized testing argue that they are unreliable, that they stifle creativity, and that they have not improved student achievement. You have now heard the main arguments on the standardized testing debate. It is up to you to do what you please with this information, and I encourage you to do additional research. When it comes to making a stance, both sides have valid arguments. I hope that now that I have briefed you on the main points of both sides, that you yourself are leaving here feeling more informed in order to choose the side that is right for you.